So the old State House was the center of Boston from the time that it was created. It's important to us to celebrate the building's history on the occasion of the 300th anniversary. So we're thinking about the world into which the old State House was born in 1713, but we're also thinking about the very important history that it lived through during the Revolutionary era. First-person interpretation is an important part of that. The challenge that we face in interpreting this history is, as I said before, that it feels very distant to people. So one of the things that we're always trying to do in all of our programs is to make it come to life.
So perhaps since you've been in our town, you've become aware of the events that are unfolding that are most upsetting.
The characters we chose this summer, Elizabeth Cummings and John Rowe, we picked them both because they had interesting and complicated stories to tell. To start off, we actually had a broad list of some potential characters who we knew that there was information to be found about them. And so we started with that broad list of characters, and we actually let our actors, our interpreters, choose the characters that spoke to them the most. So in many ways, it was the decision of the first-person interpreters. The people that we chose had complicated stories in that they were people who aren't easy to put in a box as loyalists or patriots in this kind of binary view we have of the American Revolution. They were people that challenged that a little bit. In John Rowe's case, he was someone who was very well connected to both sides and was trying very actively to play the middle road and not get involved in either side's politics too much so that either way he would be all right.
In developing the presentation, the John Rowe character and presentation, it took a bit to I guess I'd say boil down the material, to boil it down into something that could be related to an audience that was walking in, this was there. A lot of times it was a surprise to the folks that were visiting because it's a pilot program for us, and they were here for a museum experience and standard tours, so this is something a bit different for them.
An important part of our approach to this was to not think of this as a dry way of approaching history. Really what we are after here is more like a game than a way of presenting a lecture. The whole approach is very game-like because the audience is part of the game. They are participants in this type of interpretation. So they're going to be talking and interacting with our characters, and that really helps them to engage because, like a game, there are certain rules and there's a certain sense of fun that goes along with it as well, which is a big part of why we wanted to try this.
In working with the audience and presenting to the audience, a key piece was to have them interact, to get them talking, to get them asking questions.
We want you to think of this as an opportunity to have a conversation with someone from the Revolutionary time period. Think about what you'd want to ask them. What do you want to know more about? And ask them questions about those subjects. And they asked great questions. They asked off-the-wall questions in some cases. They asked questions about, you know, what you ate for breakfast or what you did in your free time. But they also asked some really probing and important questions.
There were some live wires. In fact, it was interesting. I could tell on just that first presentation, here's somebody that's into this, they're going to have some questions, and they did.
We had an interesting and very fun exploration phase where we were trying to figure out how to prepare our characters to do this because we have no precedent. This hasn't been done before and certainly hasn't been done by us, and so we had to explore the best ways to get them comfortable with acting in this way and to set up the type of interactions that we were going to have.
I remember one wise guy, in fact I wasn't wearing my true glasses at the time. I had my more modern looking glasses, and he wanted to know who my lens crafter was, and I was able to stretch that out with a quizzical look to the interpreter as to lens, craft lens, I don't understand. And then I went to explain how they were sent by I just received them from the home country, and they were crafted by the most accomplished craftsmen and carved from the shell of a tortoise.
There's this a famous phrase that the past is a foreign country, and to approach this as a cultural exploration of a different time period in a different kind of place was a lot of the place where we found the fun in the whole thing. I
had fun with that one. His wife was giving him the elbow. It was kind of fun.
How did you meet Mrs. Rowe?
Hannah. She is, as we have discussed, she's from Cambridge. She's a member of the Inman family. And we met through, it was actually in the early days of my life here in the town. It was very helpful in my role to know that I was coming to them from 1769. I was speaking from that perspective.
To really find the kinds of details that we wanted to have, we had to zero in on a specific year to interpret. The characters had to be speaking from a specific year, because otherwise they can't speak about whether or not certain events have happened yet and whether or not things have changed in their own lives.
Why 1769? It seems like a rather arbitrary year. Probably not a lot of students going through introductory courses on the American Revolution are thinking, hey, 1769, but in fact, it's an incredibly important turning point in the run-up to the American Revolution.
Part of the importance of the role of the translator was to be there for when people throw out things that are so basic to us today that we would never think about the fact that they would make no sense to someone living in the 1700s. For example, a lot of visitors would ask our characters how they felt about the Revolution. To them, that word had a literal meaning of a revolution, but they didn't really know there was no American Revolution yet.
What about the Revolution? And at that point, it would be my opportunity to give a vague look, check with the translator, and being in character. And in that time, as different questions would come up, I would have the opportunity to play a bit with and try and pique the interest and keep the discussion going, and have the people, it seemed to me to be an opportunity to have the audience think about those times in real terms, about what it would be like for the people that were living then. As I've said before, I think the outcome wasn't determined for John Rowe. He didn't know how this was going to go. Nobody knew.
And so the questions that we got from visitors really make us step back and think about how we can engage with that subject and treat it more carefully with greater nuance.
It's a pilot for the Bostonian Society to have first-person characters in the museum, and it's a wonderful setting for that. We worked in Rep Hall, in Representatives Hall, which is, we're inside the skin of the actual building. We're where these events actually happen, and that contributed to my feeling and my ability, I think, to deliver a performance to the audiences that came through, being at the actual spot and, you know, in the position. I could look out the window. Before the audience would come in, I'd make it a habit to look out the window at the dome of Faneuil Hall. You could see it between the skyscrapers over there, and I would look at that and think about John Rowe walking over and how the streets would appear at that time, and try to get into the character.
The program was very well received. We bridged the gap between the beginning of our summer, more tourist-heavy season to our fall season, when we have a lot of people who are some more history buffs and some older audiences, and we found that both types of audiences really enjoyed this program.
I found it quite rewarding to be interacting with people and have them, you could tell, and I could see, or I fancy that I could tell, that they were getting something out of it. It was something where they got a personal connection with the history and with the reality of people that lived in Boston at that time.
Thinking about what we want to do with the program down the road, I think we learned enough from this summer's pilot to know that this is something we want to do more of. We want to make it a regular part of our offerings. So we're going to do that during the summer months next year when our visitation is at its peak. But we also have plans to take this out to schools. So we're right now thinking about how we can design educational programming for school groups when they come to visit our site, where they'll get to meet with these interpreters in very much the same way that visitors to the site did during the summer. But also, I think we have an opportunity to take our programming out to schools. We have, I think, a really engaging vehicle to make the past come alive for a range of different ages within schools, elementary school right up through high school. We know that the program will be there next year because we've received some very generous funding from a range of different organizations, including the National Park Service and Eastern Bank. So we know that this is something that we can continue to build on in the years ahead. It was, I think, very engaging for our audience. We managed to connect with a lot of different segments of our audience, young people, older people, history buffs, those who really have no knowledge of the time period at all. They really engaged with this particular way of coming at the past.